Hey. So, good afternoon and welcome to today's programming, Reframing Time Management to Achieve Your Goals. I'm Nick Cunningham, the program manager at Lafayette. We have a great presentation for you. Dr. Laura Murray, the director of the Center of Integrated Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship at Lafayette College, will be speaking to us about using time in meaningful ways while also prioritizing our well-being. Before we begin, please be aware that we are recording this session. We'll stop the recording during our Q&A at the end to respect everyone's privacy, as well as if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat as we're going through. And now I'm going to turn everything over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Nick. And hi, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your day during what I know is a very busy time of year, particularly in higher ed. So we're going to talk today about quote unquote time management. And I'm putting that in air quotes because full disclosure, I actually don't think that we can manage time. The way that I think about it is that time is happening outside of us. Minutes are going by, and we actually can't stop the clock or slow it down. But the good news is we actually have a lot of agency and can make a lot of decisions about what we do in the hours of our days and weeks and years. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I should also say that I am a recovering perfectionist and a recovering procrastinator. So this is a topic that is not only of particular interest to me, but is close to my heart, and I have lots of lived experience thinking about managing my time. Oops. So let's see if I can remember how to advance slides. It's been a while since I've done a presentation on Zoom. Okay, so to get things going, I wanted to ask all of us to think about what are some challenges that we might have with time. And this question or prompt by design is pretty broad, and I'm hoping that you can interpret this in whatever way makes the most sense for you. But if you could start to think about this and then write some responses or words that come to mind into the chat, that would be great. Just to try to get a sense of who's in the audience and what are we thinking about when we're thinking about challenges with time. Okay, thank you. I see some responses coming in. Interruptions, disruptions, high priority tasks. Unexpected events, right. Too much to do. Slipping into the future, right? Following through. Too much to do, too little time. Yes, overcommitting, prioritization. Yeah, okay. So we are not alone. Part of the prompt is meant as a way to kind of normalize what many of us are experiencing, that particularly in higher ed, I would say, we have a lot on our plates and we're asked to do a lot of things, often in a short amount of time. And so we are not alone. Okay, so we'll come back to some of these items that you've shared in the chat in a moment. Let's see. Okay. But I wanted to sort of step back for a minute and go back to this idea of reframing what many people call time management. So, if you Google time management, you'll get a million hits. There are all kinds of essays and articles and tips and tricks and strategies. And they often entail specific recommendations for how to do more in less time, which is fine. I think that's valuable. But I wanted to kind of take a step back and offer to you what I like to think of as the 5 Ps of reframing time management. And I guess what I mean is that instead of tips, quote unquote tips for managing our time, I'd rather help us kind of reframe how we think about time so that we can experiment and create strategies that work for us, that are tailored and individualistic and aligned with our personal priorities and values, right? So it's not one size fits all. That seldom, if ever, works. I created a resource for you, and we're not going to look at it all right now, but Nick, if you could drop the link that I shared for the handout into the chat. There you go. That's great. It's a Google Doc that has a couple of different things on different pages, and we'll we'll get to what those are. And you should see a prompt at the top that asks you to create a copy of that. So you can create a copy, and this is meant as a tool for you to fill out when it's convenient for you after the workshop today. And I'll explain what's in there further in a moment. Okay, but first we're going to dive into what these different P's are. So perception, priorities, positive relationships, protecting our time, and planning. Okay, so we'll start at the top, and these 5 Ps you'll see on page 2 of that Google Doc that I shared, just as reference as I'm talking about these ideas. So the perception piece of it is kind of what I explained, like how might we reframe thinking about time and our relationship to it? And what do we even mean by managing time? So as I said, I would propose that we can't manage time, but we can, to a degree, a large degree, manage ourselves. Second bullet point here, I'd also propose that most of us have unstructured time in the day and in the week and in the month. We may not be aware of it or aware of how much unstructured time we have. I would also propose that unstructured time isn't free time. It's unstructured, and we can choose to structure it if we would like, but we don't have to. I'd also propose here that if a goal is to utilize your time differently, then time management isn't actually about managing time. It's really about behavior change. So my background is in educational psychology and human development, so I think a lot about behavior change. And that's really managing or trying to manage our choices, and sometimes changing our environments to make it more likely that we do certain things, more of certain things and maybe less of other things that we want to do less of. So behavior change, but it's also about identifying what our personal priorities are. What's important to us? What would we like to accomplish? And accomplishing, I don't mean just getting things done at work. I mean perhaps making sure that we have time to relax or exercise or spend with our loved ones, spending time in nature, sort of whatever our priorities are. And they can certainly include, I hope they include well-being. And then last but not least, our relationship with time and this behavior change around using our time also has to do with motivation, right? So I'd ask you to think about what motivated you to come to a session about time management. Is there something that you would like to change about your relationship with time or how you're using time or not? So thinking about time and productivity really through a motivational lens. What motivates you? Okay, so that's kind of a background framing about perception. And then next up is priorities. So what's important, right? What should we prioritize and how do we make decisions about that? So oftentimes, depending on our roles, we are given external deadlines or timelines, like the academic calendar, for example, is a sort of temporal structure that many of us work within. But within the structures that exist, we also, many of us have a lot of autonomy and can often sort of create our own deadlines depending on the type of work we're doing, teaching, research, administration, et cetera. So creating one's own timelines and deadlines can be really liberating, but it can also cause a lot of stress. So I don't know about you, but I've had many experiences where, I'll be working on a project and there's no hard deadline. I don't need to submit something to a conference or to a journal. I'm sort of working on the project on my own timeline. And even though that feels nice and liberating, it can also be really anxiety inducing because it's hard to hold myself accountable if I don't have an external deadline or a timeline. So I don't know if that resonates with anybody, but I'm guessing it might. Second bullet point here is that it's often hard to kind of disentangle what we want or need or are interested in versus what we think others want or need from us or with us. So it could be colleagues, it could be students, it could be supervisors, it could be partners and loved ones. But what we want and what we think other people want of us, not always in alignment, and that can cause some challenges. Um, and then last year, in terms of thinking about what we want to prioritize, I always try to go back to individual values, right? So what I value is going to be totally different from what everyone else here values, perhaps. I'll say one of the things I value is trying to get at least 8 hours of sleep a night. That was not always the case. But as I've aged, I've come to realize that for me, I really need a certain amount of sleep. Otherwise, I can't function very well. So knowing that that's one of my top values, sometimes I will let deadlines pass because I'm personally choosing to prioritize health and sleep, as an example. So there's no singular way to figure out how do we prioritize what to work on when, but I wanted to share one tool that some people do find helpful. So this may be familiar to some of you. It's called the Eisenhower Matrix. And as the story goes, I don't know if this is accurate, but as the story goes, one-time President Eisenhower apparently said something along the lines of, things that feel urgent aren't always necessarily the most important. And the things that are truly important don't necessarily feel urgent in the moment. So again, I don't know if he actually said that, but that idea has spawned sort of a cottage industry of kind of thinking about, what if we use these ideas of important versus urgent to try to prioritize what to work on, when, or if at all. So on the matrix here, if you see in the upper right-hand corner, the yellow is low on urgency and low on importance. So the recommendation here is decide when to do it, right? I'm sorry, that's high on importance and low on urgency. So you get to decide when to do it because it's not urgent. And then on the lower right hand, in that gray quadrant, that's the low urgency and low importance. So the recommendation here is maybe you don't do it, whatever that task is or that activity. And then on the left, you see, high importance, urgent and important. Maybe you should work on it now. And then lower left quadrant, urgent, but not important, delegated. So to the degree that that might be helpful, I don't necessarily use, the matrix this matrix to actually map out what to work on, but I do kind of use it as just a sort of tool to have in mind that, okay, if I feel like I need to be doing this right now, is it because it feels urgent that I want to complete this task or share it with a collaborator or meet an external deadline? Or is it important? Maybe there's no external deadline, but it's actually completing this book proposal is more important for me personally. If that's the case, then maybe I should bump it up and work on it today as opposed to putting it off. Even though there's no deadline, it's aligned with my values to submit this book proposal in a timely way. So I'm going to work on that. So it's kind of just a helpful mental model for me to sort of think about what do I want to work on when. And again, I don't know about you, but I think for me and many of us find that we're working on the things that feel urgent. I have to do my grading now. I have to do XYZ. I have to meet this deadline. And we're constantly working on things that have external deadlines for this week, next week. But the longer term projects, right? Teaching, research, writing, whatever it might be, planning new programs at our universities. When do we actually set aside the time to work on those longer term projects? Do those projects fall by the wayside, or do we deprioritize them because they don't feel urgent in the moment? Okay, so moving right along, here's something that I don't often see in conversations related to time or time management. I've done a lot of reading, perhaps as you have as well, again, about sort of tips and tricks and strategies. But what I rarely see in any of that is the acknowledgement that we are not lone wolves. We are human beings, thus very social animals. We thrive in relationships. And the way that we use time, the decisions that we make about time, and the constraints that we often feel in our time are very much connected to other people in the world through our relationships. So I would propose that the way that we operate and choose to use our time is really relational, and that we don't always acknowledge or remember that. So I wanted to just kind of prompt you and ask you to think about how your interactions with others affect your choices about time. So we have relationships with colleagues, supervisors, potentially mentors, collaborators, students, friends and family, of course. So how do, again, their expectations of us, or our perceptions of their expectations of us, inform our decisions about how to use time? And are there aspects of that that we might want to change? Maybe, maybe not. Um, if you jump down to the third bullet point here, this is kind of a reminder that many of us have the benefits of wonderful friends and colleagues and partners. And we can often call in a friend, lean on a friend, and recruit a colleague, for example, to help hold us to be accountable, to meet a certain deadline, or to work on a task. So that can look like participating in a writing group, for example, or it could simply be, texting a friend or a colleague in the morning and saying to them, today, I'm going to spend 10 minutes working on X, and then checking in with them later in the day to say whether you actually did that task or not. And that may seem small or silly, but there's actually a lot of literature to show that if we say aloud or write to someone and express a commitment to doing something, we are much more likely, significantly more likely, to actually do that thing if we've said it aloud or written it down and shared it with someone, particularly someone that we have a trusting relationship with. So we can use that to our advantage as well. And then last but not least, if there are certain things that we can delegate, I would encourage us to lean into that as well. Not always possible, but if you have collaborators or colleagues or students, and you can ask them to share the load and take on tasks so that your time can be freed up a little bit, I encourage us to do that as well. Before moving along to our last two Ps, I wanted to pause and ask any of you, does this spark any thoughts or questions for you related to time thus far? So we've talked about relationships, and we've talked about how we might prioritize what to do and when. And we've talked about our perception of time, and maybe that managing time is really about managing our own behaviors. So does this resonate with anybody, or anyone have any questions so far? And feel free to write in the chat, or you can even unmute yourselves and speak if you like. Anybody? No questions. Yes, makes sense. Thank you, Catherine. All right. And then Maureen, relationships take time, and that is not reflected on my calendar. Aha, yes. That is exactly what I was gesturing towards. So yes. And our choices definitely affect our time. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Definitely resonates in terms of prioritizing time and perception. Okay, good. Urgent versus important is helpful. Okay, excellent. So keep the comments coming if you like, and I'm going to move ahead to this idea of protecting our time, right? And kind of as an aside, I would say that if you think about the use of the word time, it often goes hand in hand with other words like spend, waste, protect, collect. So it's often sort of described in this way that makes it seem transactional. So just kind of an editorial aside, but I do think it's kind of interesting that the way we often talk about time is almost as though it's a currency or something. So anyway, this slide is meant to kind of help us think about, protecting our time in the sense that we often will say, number one, say yes to lots of things. So especially in academia, Many of us have lots of different interests. We tend to be good at a lot of things. We like to be helpful, and often we'll find ourselves saying yes to requests and different opportunities and tasks, et cetera, which is great in many ways. But if we say yes too often, we might find ourselves, like I have in the past, having taken on so many things that we're no longer able to attend to each of them or to do them to the level that we would like. So we've sort of taken on too much, and then it becomes a difficult space where we have to decide, well, should I let something go? Do I continue sort of doing all these things at maybe a mediocre level, or do I let one or more go so that I can attend to the things that are of most value to me, and do them in a better way, more aligned with my values? If that's the case, then we have to figure out how to gracefully step aside and let go of some of the things we've taken on. So that's kind of the background behind this idea of saying yes strategically. It's a kind of another way of saying no to certain requests. So I would offer that the next time a colleague or a former collaborator or a student or a partner or spouse asks you to do something, before saying yes or no, just take a beat and simply say, thank you so much for thinking of me. Let me sleep on it, right? So the idea here is, especially for bigger asks, take some time before you decide. And that actually is respecting yourself, but also respecting the person who's making the request. Because if you immediately say yes and take it on, and then realize after the fact, ooh, I've taken on too much, I actually can't do that, or I can't do it very well, then you're kind of letting yourself down and the requester down. So take some time, think about, if I take this new opportunity or task on, what does that entail? How much time would I like to allocate to that? Is this opportunity aligned with my near-term or longer-term goals, et cetera? So take your time, avoid taking on too many things, as I said. That's hard to do. Make choices based on your personal values and or your professional goals, sense of purpose. And then last but not least, I like to encourage people to, this is what I call making an appointment with ourselves. So if you look at your calendar, so how many of you, just quick, show of virtual or actual hands, use something like a Google Calendar or some sort of digital calendar, right? Many of us do, most of us do. And if we don't use that, we often will have like a journal or something handwritten. Okay, so second related question, if I were to look at your Google Calendar, for example, how many of the meetings on there are, or items on the calendar are you meeting with someone or having to be somewhere? I'm assuming probably most, right? If not all, right? And that's pretty typical. I've looked at a lot of people's calendars. And most of us, much of the time, will put down, yeah, a lot, Maddie says, oh, I have to be somewhere. I'm meeting with so-and-so from 9 to 9:30. From 11 to 12, I'm doing XYZ. So the flip side of that is, how frequently do we actually block out a time and set it aside as an appointment with ourselves to work on a particular task or to, move a particular project forward? Oh, good. Chris says they also have focus time on the Google Calendar too. Excellent. We will get to that in a moment. So the takeaway here is, I encourage us all to start really valuing our own appointments with ourselves and respecting that time in the same way that we respect other people's time. So I guess what I mean is, if I make an appointment with a colleague or a student, let's say for 11 a.m. tomorrow, and I'm going to be there at 11 a.m. tomorrow, unless something totally unexpected comes up or an emergency, in which case, I'll write them an apology. So sorry, can we reschedule, right? But for the most part, I think when we make appointments, we pretty much show up, right? That's what we're supposed to do. However, when we make appointments with ourselves and put down on the calendar, oh, from 2 to 3 tomorrow, I'm going to work on that book chapter and, do these revisions. How likely is it that if something else comes up tomorrow afternoon, we push that appointment with ourselves to the wayside and we prioritize the other person's request of us? I'm speaking from personal experience here, and I'm guessing that others of you have had similar experiences. So I encourage us to make those appointments with ourselves and really to, again, respect them in the way that we do when we make an appointment with a respected colleague, i.e., keep it, right? And work on the task that you had set aside that time for. Okay, so planning. So sort of in the same vein, thinking about calendars and planning, how many of you have some sort of a to-do list, either in a Google Doc or something that you handwrite? Right, many of us do. I know I do. Okay, so ideally, the to-do list, the things on there are, somehow aligned with our values, what we want to accomplish or complete at work, what we want to do with friends and family, et cetera. Not always. I mean, there are going to be those additional tasks like laundry and shopping and, tasks that aren't necessarily like aligned with our values, but we need to do them, right? So we have this running list. How many of you have the experience, as I do, of having your to-do list and thinking, oh, I'm going to accomplish these things today, but you actually don't accomplish all of them? And so then you move those things that you haven't accomplished to the next day. And then eventually the to-do list actually gets longer and longer. So I've had that experience. So I encourage you to try, if you can, an experiment. Take your to-do list in whatever form it exists and take your calendar, Google Calendar or whatever calendar you use, and try to merge those things. So this is often called calendar blocking or blocking. But the idea is that instead of just setting aside, I'm going to work or write for 2 hours tomorrow, that's actually not specific enough. And instead, if you say, I'm going to set aside this protected 2-hour window tomorrow, and then I'm going to take these 2 items off of my to-do list and I'm going to put them in that 2-hour window and work on those 2 things. You're much more likely to actually work on those 2 things during that 2-hour window and make progress. So it seems like a simple shift, but many of us, much of the time, don't combine the proverbial or actual to-do list with what's on our calendar and when are we working on what. And then last bullet point on this slide, and it may seem counterintuitive, the more structure we create on a calendar, the more flexibility we actually have, right? So I'm absolutely not advocating that we, block out and schedule every hour of every day. No, not possible. Doesn't sound like very much fun either. But if we do have some structured time where we're committing to work on certain tasks, if and when something unexpected comes up, as it inevitably will, as somebody mentioned in the chat, we can then sort of do a swap and say, oh, wow, I was going to spend 2 hours working on my book proposal tomorrow afternoon. I got a request to do something else instead. That's okay. I'm going to do something else. But I know that 2-hour window, I didn't actually do the writing I had hoped. So I'm going to move that 2-hour window to another day. And it just gives you a sense of sort of autonomy, and you can make decisions without forgetting about that appointment with yourself that you had set. And I see Maddie writes, I've been trying to use this technique at work, then it all goes out the window when one of my bosses comes in and asks me to do something else, or I get pulled into another project. Do you have any tips on how to handle this situation? Well, it's one idea, and again, it's context specific, of course, is if a supervisor comes in and says, during your protected work time, hey, can you do X, Y, Z? You could ask them, you could say, for example, oh, I'm working on this right now. Is what you're asking urgent? Is it time sensitive? Do you have a sense of when that task needs to be completed? And they'll give you some more information, then maybe you could have a conversation about it. If you try that and they're still pushing and you're still not sure that you want to be working on that new task, you could recruit them, supervisor or colleague who's making the request, to help you sort of solve this conundrum. So what I mean is you could say something along the lines of, oh, wow, right now or for the rest of the afternoon, I had set aside time to work on X. Um, I don't know if I can do X and Y today. Do you have a sense of whether one is more important or urgent than another? Can you help me figure out a way to accomplish these together? Maybe, and then again, maybe you recruit their help, or you could delegate, or they realize, oh wow, I didn't know you were working on project X. Continue with it. Project Y, we can wait till tomorrow, or we have until next week. So I would just try to get more information. And I would also let people know that, hey, one of the things I'm doing is setting aside deep work time. Because oftentimes people don't know, that you're doing that. And they might think twice next time before interrupting you. Hopefully. We'll see. Okay. So here's an example of what time blocking can look like. It can take many forms, but the general idea is that, you set aside time um, to do what many, including Cal Newport, call deep work. So Cal Newport is a faculty member, a computer scientist. I can't remember if he's at American or Georgetown. Somebody can let me know in the chat. But he arguably is more famous for his sort of popular books. He's written a lot about social media and distraction and attention and getting deep work done. So he was one of the first to propose this idea of, setting aside protected windows of time to do really focused work, meaning no interruptions, no distractions, put your cell phone away. You're not attending to social media. You're just working on that one thing. You're unitasking or monotasking. My critique of this little example visual that you see here is I actually don't think it's specific enough. So that focus block or the deep work block or the planning block, I would encourage you to be even more specific. The focus block, well, what are you focusing on? What task or activity in particular are you working on during that 2-hour window or 2.5-hour window? You don't necessarily have to finish it, but if you can articulate what you're going to be doing before that 9 a.m. window starts, you'll be much more likely to make some progress. Same thing with planning. Okay, well, what are you planning? Like, what do you hope to have planned by the end of that 1 or 2-hour window? So the more specific, the more likely you will be to actually make some progress. Okay, so last but not least, back to the handout that Nick dropped in the chat earlier. And you will see on page 1, there is a little tool that I created to help us think about how we are using our time to kind of estimate. So everybody see page 1? I'm going to just move this over here for a second so that you can see this. This is what it looks like. Okay. So my hope is that you can complete this after the workshop today. Oops. And the idea is I wrote down things that many of us do each day. It's not a comprehensive or exhaustive list, so please feel free when you make your copy to change it or edit it or add things or delete things. But the idea is just kind of quickly off the top of your head to move through this document and to better yet, print it out and then just estimate how much time each day on a typical, let's say a typical work day, do I spend sleeping? Do I spend eating 3 meals? Do I spend commuting to and from work, et cetera, et cetera? And then when you filled in the lines, you're going to multiply each of those lines by 7 days in the week. And then you're going to get an estimate of how much time is allotted to all of these kind of typical tasks, right? But here's where it gets interesting, I think. At the bottom of page one, you'll see 168 hours in 1 week. So it turns out 24 hours in a day times 7 days in a week equals 168 hours. Is that surprising to kind of quantify that and think about that? It was for me the first time I did it. But here's the interesting thing, I think. Most of us, when filling out a sheet like this, will come up with a number that's less than 168, right? And so you're going to subtract your sum from 168, and you'll have a number of hours that are left over. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 22, right? Or more or less. But you're going to have some number of hours that are left over. And I would argue that those are the hours that are usually for you unstructured, right? And that's kind of a gift to be able to articulate to yourself, oh, usually on an average week, I might have 8 hours or 10 hours where I'm not really, doing anything, or I'm not sure what I'm doing. And with that in mind, I'm scrolling down to page 2 here. I encourage you to sort of go back and reflect on some of those 5 Ps, right? And just sort of fill in like, what are my priorities? What are the relationships that are drawing on my time? And how do I feel about that, right? So you're going to do some reflection. And then the time log, right? So after you've done those first pieces, this is just one example. You can create your own log that is, better serve your purposes. But in general, the idea is you've done an estimate of how you think you use your time. You've made some sort of assumptions or expressions of how you might want to alter your time use. And here you're actually going to spend 1, 2, or even more days doing a little log of your time. It doesn't have to be every hour or every activity, but in general, sort of, log, well, what am I doing each day? How much time am I spending on different activities? If you're feeling particularly invested in this, you can even write down, is there an activity? Did I have a goal or an objective connected to that activity? Did I meet the goal or objective? Why or why not? What might I change? Right? So again, a tool to get a better sense of how am I using my time? More granular and specific than, oh my gosh, I'm always tired. I don't get enough sleep. I have too much on my plate. Okay, it's going to be more likely that you can actually do something about that if you have some more specific data about how your day is actually shaping up, right? So I gave you two days here, but you can obviously do more if you like. And then last but not least, on the last page of this handout, here is what I call the aspirational weekly calendar, right? So now you have a sense of how am I actually using my time? You've thought about, are there things about how I'm allocating time that I'd like to change? And then here is, how would I like to prioritize and allocate my time differently? So you can write down, hours and activities for different days of the week, and then transpose this onto a Google Calendar, for example, and maybe experiment with some calendar blocking or time blocking, and start to prioritize, things that are meaningful for you, that will move you closer to your near-term and longer-term goals. So again, I invite you to do some of this if it's of interest and if you like. Not necessary, but having done this and having spoken to many people who've done this or something similar in the past, it can be really revealing and eye-opening. So you will likely learn something about yourself if you do an activity like this. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a second. And let's see. All right. So that is sort of the material that I had to share. Are there questions or thoughts?
Well, before we get to questions and thoughts, I'm just gonna stop our recording to respect everyone's privacy. So I
Sure.
just want to take a moment to thank you, Dr. Murray, for such an informative presentation. And
You're
please, if you
welcome.
have any questions, we have the time, so we encourage any and all questions.